Okay, everyone, I'm going to ask you again to mute your phones because we're getting some noise on the line, and I'm going to start our webinar. This webinar is an introduction to the Advocacy Learning Lab. It is a tool that is available to members of Kids Count, the Partnership for America's Children, and the SPP network. We have 3 speakers today. After me, the first one will be Jan Jackson, who is a senior associate at the Annie Foundation and who's brainstormed this entire Advocacy Learning Lab was. After that, Cheryl Maxey, also at the Casey Foundation, will take you through how to use the Advocacy Learning Lab, and then I'll finish up with some ideas for how to use the Advocacy Learning Lab. Before I turn over to Jan, I'm going to ask you all to take 2 polls just so we know a little bit more about our audience. So here's, sorry, we seem to be having trouble advancing the slides. Give me a moment here. There we go. Please answer this question, and in a minute we'll go look at the results. Or actually, we can do that while you answer it. So it looks like most of the people, we'll give you a couple more moments. We have at least one person who really needs to mute their phone. Please use *6 to mute your phone to get rid of the background noise. Okay, so it looks like most people on this webinar have not used the Advocacy Learning Lab, and this will be a great place for you to learn how to do it. We do have one more question for you, which is, do you have an Advocacy Learning Lab password? And if you don't have one, you can get one by emailing Cheryl McAfee, and that's her email right there on the screen. And Cheryl will make sure you get one. If you're not sure if you have one, if you're getting the monthly Advocacy Learning Lab updates on key documents, then that means you've got a password. Okay, let's see if that helps. Okay, so most of you also do not have a password. Please email Cheryl, and we'll get you set up. Okay, I'm now going to turn this over to Jan, who will talk to us about the Advocacy Learning Lab.
Hi, this is Jan Jackson, and there's someone on the line that we can hear. It sounds like we are in a train station. There's typing. There's loud sounds. This is being recorded, and we're using it for training purpose. So we really appreciate you using that *6 button. And it sounds like we're doing a little bit better. So thanks so much, Debbie. This is Jan Jackson. I'm a senior associate at the Casey Foundation working in the Policy Reform and Advocacy Unit. And about 7 years ago, our president, Patrick McCarthy, directed our team to do everything we could to strengthen the capacity of state child advocates in America. And so we set up about a body of work that's continuing to this day. We realized that state-level advocacy is being done by many different organizations, all independent. Our Kids Count network, which is comprised of a member in every state, are all completely independent organizations, as are the members of PACT and SPP and other policy networks. So we began by pulling in about 50 people from the field. These were leaders who had been able to get a lot accomplished in the state legislature, technical assistance providers and experts here at the Foundation, and spent about a year coming up with a list of what we felt were core capacities for effective state-level advocacy. We realized that this needed to be turned into some way that organizations could assess themselves, and so in 2014 we worked with our steering committee and an independent group, Community Wealth Partners, to conduct an independent and confidential assessment. Many people within each organization could take the assessment, and that led to a baseline, really the first baseline we had about where organizations organizations rated themselves on these different competencies. We realize, though, that there's no point in asking hardworking advocates to assess where they need help without quickly providing them with that help. And so the Advocacy Learning Lab was built simultaneously as a place where leaders and their staff could go online to quickly see how all the competencies were organized, to learn what they are, how to do it, and to begin to create an online resource where we could code knowledge, both historical knowledge of advocates that have been working for the past couple decades, and also knowledge going forward. So the Learning Lab is available to all of you on this line, your organizations, your coalition partners, anyone that is interested in working on behalf of kids and families within the advocacy arena. And we've found it to be a very, very useful place to, as you all produce knowledge and resources and videos, it's a place to house it so that other people around the country can learn of the great work that we're all doing and accelerate our ability to help support the next generation of advocates and to house the knowledge that's been produced that we think is really important for our times. So that's a little bit about the lab. As I said, hundreds of people have contributed to its design, to the writing. Debbie Stein did a phenomenal job of writing a lot of the content. Cheryl has done an extraordinary job of taking the knowledge and uploading it and keeping it fresh and relevant. So we want you to understand it as a resource, to use it, and to contribute to it. And with that, I'll turn it over to Cheryl. Cheryl, you may be muted.
Cheryl, you should be able to use *7 to unmute yourself.
Until Cheryl comes on, I can begin to do the presentation so that we can. There we go. Great.
Oh, I'm
now
sorry.
Now we can hear you.
Okay, sorry about that. Thank you, Jan and Debbie, and thank you all for joining us for this webinar. I will start off by saying that we had a serious problem with our server environment just this past summer, and so we are still kind of correcting some problems. If you have not received a password yet, I'm hopeful that we can get that to you by the end of the week. We are just a little behind in doing that. So I appreciate your patience. Advocacy Learning Lab is a password-protected site because there is some content on it that is proprietary. So we do have you sign in. You'll see the sign-in page here on this slide. You'll see that I put my name in there, and you notice that Advocacy Learning Lab is part of the password. So when it asks you for your all password, that is what you would use. We do not use this as a mail password for anybody. It's strictly for a login password. You can reset or change your password with the Manage Password link, which is under the Submit button. You just click on that link. It takes you to another screen where you input your own email, the one that you are using for work, and then you will receive a link back to change your password. You can reset your password, you can change your password, but you can only change your password once every 24 hours. Resetting your password can be done at any time. Once you're into the Advocacy Learning Lab, there's a front page that has our 6 categories or 6 areas of competencies at the top in color code. There's also what we call a hero on the front page, which is a video or a featured resource on that page. Clicking on the little arrow there will pop up a window where you can watch the video. Down below on that first page, you'll find links to webinars. Those are organized by date. If you click on View Webinars, which is the first box there, it will give you a list of those webinars organized by date. Below that, the timely monthly alerts, which we usually send out in emails, are always found on the home page as well. So if you haven't received that email or you can't find it or it got stuck somewhere, you can always come to the Advocacy Learning Lab and find our monthly alerts with links to those resources. We try to have these be as timely and relevant as possible for the work that you're doing right now. We also have a tab for featured resources, which are things we want to elevate, we think are important to read. The overview, which you can get to by the top menu tab, provides links to the list of competencies which make the core of this site, as well as the list of policy topics. What is the Advocacy Learning Lab? That's really a description of what our purpose is, how we were developed, where we came from, and the methodology behind the competency assessment. That assessment has been taken by most of the Kids Count organizations, and I think most of the PAC organizations as well. Clicking on the competencies outline or the competencies overview, you'll get a link or a listing of those competencies that are categorized. So those under strategic leadership, you'll see those sub competencies, and then the individual competencies under those. And this is a longer page. I'm just showing you the top of it. The little purple dot in the corner is a way to download this. This little symbol is on a lot of pages where you can download and print it to PDF. You can link from this particular list directly to competencies or sub areas. You can also navigate using this drop down, which is found on the top bar with the color coding. Just click on whatever you're interested in and a box will open up like this that shows you what is whatever that is. You can click on what is to see more about this particular competency area, and then below that you get links to the sub areas. Our policy analysis or policy topics are found under policy analysis. These are 18 distinct policy areas that we highlight here. These are areas that you might not work on. Maybe your organization doesn't really do much with a particular policy area, but all of these affect us in some way as child and family advocates. We want you to know what it is, why it matters, and at the federal and state levels, what is significant about each of these. And they're also have supporting resources on them as well. The resources, we have over 1,400 in all. When you see the list of resources, if you click on that link, these are listed by most recently added at the top. You can then search for them in the search box by keyword or term. On the left-hand side, you'll see that there are filters. These are filters that can be, they open up like a little drop-down, so there's a little box next to them, so you can close them up if you want to. I've closed up a couple and left the other ones open so you can just see how this works. You would click on whichever one you were interested in if you wanted to filter, and then hit apply, which is down below each of those. And it would apply that filter to the results that you have. When you click on any of these resources, a window will pop up with information about the resource, what it is, kind of bibliographic information about it, and then a link to the resource itself. So the competencies, to get back to the core of what all is, the competencies are organized into these 6 different competency areas. Each area drops down, as I showed you on the menu before, to show the sub-areas. And then the sub-areas are listed at the bottom of that page with links. So if you're looking at this as race, equity, and inclusion as an example, this shows at the top, as you clicked on the box that said race, equity, inclusion, you would get this drop down. Once you clicked on what is race, equity, you would get race, equity, and inclusion, this page that is shown. And at the bottom of this page are the sub areas, or sub competency areas. To the right of each of those, there's a link to more information about that sub area and links to the competencies themselves. So in the full sub area, I'm going to back up a little bit here. There's a little square at the top right that says View Full Sub Competencies. If you click on that, it will give you a page like was earlier that is printable. It's a lot of text in here, but we felt like we didn't want to burden anybody with a lot of text on the site itself. We've kind of put these in places so that when you need this information, it's available to you. But this will give you more information about what these sub-areas are. The sub-areas are group relevant individual competencies. So under race, equity, and inclusion, knowledge, and awareness, which is the sub-area, you'll see at the bottom that these are the individual competencies below there. If I click on knowledge of equity from that previous screen, I see a page that has at the bottom resources that support that particular competency. There's also links to related competencies as well as filters for the resources. If I clicked on the upper right little gray box in there, I would get this full list of what is this competency, what is it, why does it matter, how to do it, and tools and resources. So Kids Count grantees also have profile pages. We have network members. So if you look at network members link, you'll get a link or a list of all the Kids Count network members. You can filter those with different kinds of filters on the left-hand side. Kids Count grantees can view their competency assessment in the dashboard for their organization. They would be the only ones to see dashboards and recommendations by specific organization that they belong to. But you see that there's a lot of information in this profile page. Has information on what kind of work they're doing, what kind of other organizations they're involved in. So if you were, say, looking for somebody who was a member of SPP, along with everybody else, you could find everybody who is in this network by clicking on SPP as one of their affiliates or affiliations, and bring up that whole list of those that were also SPP members. So now I'm going to turn it back to Jan, I believe, or Debbie.
I can jump in here in terms of ways that the Casey Foundation has supported the use of the Learning Lab within the Kids Count Network, and then invite Debbie to do the same for the PAC Network. We find that now, a couple years out, that users have found it to be a great way of orienting new staff. So if you have a new data and research person that's joining your staff, directing them to the data section of this for 101s or how to get started, takes advantage of 20 years of knowledge and technical assistance we've provided state folks around how to do the state and county-based Kids Count data. In the policy area, we have asked top people in the country to write overviews of 18 areas of public policy that affect kids and families. And so in that area, if you've got a new policy staff that's joined your staff or you're new yourself, you can quickly get access to a guide to the main federal statutes and regulations concerning that area of policy, key things that may be going on at the state at that level, and also links to resources that people around the country have contributed about how they've addressed those areas within the policy domain. Similarly, in strategic communication, we have a lot of background information on understanding how Americans think about a lot of different aspects of kid and family policy, how to talk so people will listen. And in each of these 6 domains, strategic leadership, organizational development, data, policy, communication, we have woven in race equity capacity. So they are woven into the different domains, and they're also a standalone area of competence, because we know at the end of the day, if you don't begin your work with an understanding of historical, structural factors affecting race, immigration, ethnicity in this country, and if at every step along the way you're not partnering with people on the ground whose lives are really will be affected by your work, if you don't understand how to get disaggregated data and make sense of it, if you don't advance policies that are going to target areas and people that have been left behind and make sure that they're on the pathway to opportunity and justice, that many of our efforts, even if they're successful, won't close that gap that we see on pretty much every data indicator that we monitor in America. You will see gaps in well-being for kids of color in this country, and they've been under a special threat the last 2 years at both federal and state and local actions. So that's an overview of how people have used it. It can also be useful for when a new executive director comes in and is trying to get a sense of what makes these advocacy organizations unique. They're not like other nonprofits, so both strengthening their strategic leadership and organizational development capacity, but within the context of an advocacy orientation. And finally, some people who have all that and are getting lots of help from other providers find it very helpful to just have these monthly updates. You will get it in the mail, and it will also be posted. So if something's happening and you just want a quick place to go to get the very best thinking from our national policy partners or some of our state folks that are innovating in particular areas, it's just a quick digest of things that we think are uniquely relevant to our networks. Debbie, I want to turn it over to you for additional thoughts about how members can use it.
Sure. I think that largely covers it. I do want to flag a couple of things. One is that many times people are expert on the policy issues in their state, but they are not necessarily familiar with the federal law that funds the programs in their states. And we did put in some basic resources there in each of the policy areas. So if you're struggling with an issue where state law lets a bad thing happen, you may want to take a look at the federal law and make sure you understand in context whether this is something that federal law should be governing. We try and send Cheryl and Jan materials from the partnership and get them uploaded there, as well as putting them on our own website. Partnership members particularly have looked for and have found useful the organizational development tools, because those are not as readily available. So things like information on strategic planning, information on personnel policies. We've been trying to beef that section up, but there's some really good basic advice in there. Things like, how big should your reserve fund be? So I encourage you, if you're struggling with those kinds of organizational skills or organizational knowledge, to take a look at it. Many of you have been promoted through the ranks because of your great advocacy skills, and then you reach a management level or an executive director level, and there's a whole new set of challenges, and the website can be really helpful with those. I think that's most of it. It is very definitely a living tool, and so we do want to upload things to it as well. So I'm going to move us over to questions, and I'm also going to take the first question that we've gotten which is from Ginny Blankenship in Arkansas, and I think Cheryl is the right person to answer this. Cheryl, Ginny wants to know, how do we submit new publications for our organization's page? Cheryl? You may be muted again. Use *7 to unmute.
To submit something, if you have an organization page under network members, on the left-hand side of that organization page, there are links. So you can submit either a resource, it'll be a link, it'll be a form that's easy to fill out. You can submit a resource, which we term to be an internet linked document, or you can submit a document which is an uploaded document. So you can either upload or link to documents with that form.
Okay. Does anyone else have questions about the Advocacy Learning Lab? Suggestions? We do have a question here from, I'm sorry, I may not pronounce this right, Cirilla Estella Vasquez Guzman. She said, sorry I missed the login piece because of some sound problems. Can that be reiterated? So Cheryl, if you could just take her through, again, how to log into the site initially, that would be great.
Yes, and I'm just going to go back to the page that shows the login. There we go. So when you log in, you will use the login password that you receive or have received. It's always ended by @advocacylearninglab.org. That's always the last part of your password. And then whatever password you received, you can change your password or reset your password using the Manage Password under the Submit button. That link will take you to a page where you put in your own work email. Your work email will get an email giving you a link to do those changes or reset. You can reset at any time, but you can only change your password once every 24 hours.
And then we have another question, which really we probably should have started the whole webinar with, which is, what is the website address?
Yes, it's https // of course, www.advocacylearninglab.org.
So I have just typed this in so that you can all see it and make a note of it. Do we have any more questions?
I can jump in with another thing we forgot to mention, which is a number of Kids Count organizations and now both Partnership and SVP have gone through the assessment process, and it will happen again for Kids Count in 2019. And Community Wealth Partners is the organization that takes all of the responses. So if you had like 10 people from your organization take the capacity indicator assessment, they would put it all together and give you an individual organizational profile that we as funders would never see, but it would give you a profile of where you stack up on these different competencies, areas that you are very, very strong in. It can compare, whether or not you've strengthened that capacity since the last time you took it. And it will also list a number of areas where you could continue to build your strengths. And so another reason the Advocacy Learning Lab was created was to give to create some transparency to that process where organizations could go online to download resources without the foundation being involved in it. So it really was aimed at being a very strategic self-help resource. And if you're in a Kids Count organization, you might want to ask your exec or your Kids Count person whether or not they have a copy of that 2016 individual profile and use it to begin navigating the site and make sure that you have access to the most up-to-date resources in areas where you're still growing stronger.
So we have Another question here from Leslie Barnes. Can TA providers upload documents directly to the lab, or do we send the document to Jan or Cheryl to upload?
Cheryl, you want to respond to that one?
Cheryl was being so good about using the mute button.
Leslie, you can do it either way. You can send it to both of us. I'm at J. Jackson at AECF, and Cheryl has the same, it's first letter and last name. So feel free to send it to either one of us, and we'll make sure to upload it.
And I'm sorry, I think I was still muted. If you are a TA provider and you have access to that page, it should, that same link to add a web-based resource or add a resource document should appear in that left column. And it's a form that you can fill out and attach or link to documents.
Jan, I wonder if you could talk to them about who in their organizations can get access to the Learning Lab. Is it just paid staff, or does it include board? Does it include volunteers?
Sure. We would love every staff member at any of our primary 3 networks to have a password and see this as being a resource for you. If there's volunteers or interns that are working as close-in partners, if you have coalition partners that you feel this could really benefit, one of the ways that we like to support our grantees is making resources available to them, which they then give to their coalition partners, so that people come to see them not only as the prime source of accurate, up-to-date, reliable data on kids, but that partners have access to the knowledge that's on the lab, webinars, that are publicly available, so that they see you as being a resource, so that there's a benefit to being part of these networks and having knowledge be produced, by national organizations or the foundation, which we just hand to you to hand to your partners. We know that many people doing extraordinary good work, including many of you and certainly your community partners, just don't have the time, the resources, or the money to create some of these things. And if there's templates or whatever that help you do your work faster, easier, smoother, we're all about that. So the only reason that it's restricted by a password is because some organizations have shared things that you don't necessarily want all the hackers in Russia to know about. But it's meant to be widely available to anyone that you trust and with whom you partner to do this work.
And I would just add on too that board members, we're happy to have board members be part of this. I think it's a way of really educating your board members. Plus, there are resources for board members on the site as well. This is really not just for the advocacy work itself. This is really to strengthen your organization. Because if your organization isn't strong, if your financial situation isn't strong, the way you organize your finances, if you don't have good plans for strategic plans for how you're going to do the work, all of that really supports how that work is done. And so this is kind of a soup to nuts kind of approach, which is strengthen your organization, strengthen you in the advocacy for more success.
That's great. So we have a question here that Jan or Cheryl may be able to answer, but if they can't, I'm also going to ask someone who's interested in talking about it to say so in the chat box, and then I'll unmute you, because I've been muting everybody to avoid the background noise, and let you talk about it. And the question is, could you talk about a model person or organization that has been successful at engaging with all? An example would be great.
I can give one, which is we have very close working relationships with new executive directors. The aggregate report that we got in 2016 really emphasized that when an organization does not have a really tight succession plan, when the board is not fully engaged and it's a rough transition, particularly if it's a founder, executive director to a new foundation, that's the time when an organization is very, very vulnerable. So as a result of the aggregate report, we really beefed up the resources that were available in the succession planning competency, which is in the organizational development section of the Learning Lab, and we instituted a new executive boot camp where we brought new execs in and made sure they knew all the resources that were available on all and our TA, and that we partnered them as a peer with a more seasoned executive director. And then we directed them specifically along with our TA, so maybe they had a coach from Community Wealth Partners, or they had Robbie Ross Tisch do fund development. We had the TA providers as well as foundation liaisons support that new executive director, saying, sounds like you could really use this form for engaging your board in a different way, and here it is on the lab. Or to board members that were really worried about transitions, we could walk them through, here's all the resources. First use the resources, listen to the webinars. Then if you want additional help, call us back and we'll link you to a TA provider, to help you through the strategic planning process. So we have used it with new executive director to help them become better managers and to see the different resources available to them and their staff.
Great. Do we have anyone who is in the audience who had a really good experience with the Advocacy Learning Lab and would like to talk about it? We may not, since this really has been largely new participants, but I thought I'd give someone a chance to offer that. Okay. It doesn't look like we have any more questions, so I want to thank you all for joining us today. As you know, this webinar was recorded. I'm going to download it and put it on the Partnership YouTube site and on the Partnership website, and it will be available for you to go back to or for you to steer new colleagues to when they join the organization, so that people don't have to wait until we offer webinars. This webinar will be available to them. Jan and Cheryl, thank you so much for joining us today and presenting on the Advocacy Learning Lab and for creating the Advocacy Learning Lab. And I see a question about what the partnership website is. I think this will also go in the Advocacy Learning Lab itself, but the partnership website is foramericaschildren.org, and that is FOR americaschildren.org. And I'm afraid I do not remember our YouTube channel offhand, but I'm sure if you go on and search for Partnership for America's Children in YouTube, you'll find it there. And we have a number of webinars there, not just this one. So that's a great way to tap into the webinars that the Casey Foundation and we and the Center on Budget have been offering over the last few years. They're in the Advocacy Learning Lab, and they're also on our website. Have a great day, everyone, and I hope you take some time to explore the Learning Lab and get comfortable with it. See many of you next week.
Thanks.
Bye.